Good evening and welcome to the Fourth Estate. We've just been reminiscing about what happened to the Fourth Estate when it was starting. And then the panel was Chris Obori, Frank Tumwebaze, and Betty Kamia. We wish them well where they are at the moment. Yes, Angelo Izama, then hosted by Alan Kasuja. Yes, Alan Kasuja was a great part about remodeling this show, by the way. But welcome to this week's edition of the Fourth Estate. We have with us a panel of the most elite journalists you can find in the land. We have Suleiman Kakaire, who is a former, do I say former?
I'm still a journalist.
You're still a journalist, but
yes.
Formerly with The Observer, currently running in a constituency for a membership of parliament. We have Christine Kasemire, who comes from our Monitor Business Desk. Thank you so much for joining us. You make your first appearance on the Fourth Estate today. And then we have Yusuf Serunkuma, who is our resident analyst here, but also writes a column for The Observer. I want to start with you, Suleiman. You've read the ruling that Peter Adonyo issued in the Ham Mukasa case, Ham versus the Diamond Trust Bank. Just help us understand, in a very short frame, what does this ruling mean for the banking industry?
Well, that proceeds from a point of first, thank you, Raymond, and viewers. Good evening once again. It proceeds from a point of the orders made by the court. One of the orders made by the court was a finding of procedural breach and illegality on the part of DTB Uganda, DTB Kenya, to have operated business, moved to a point of lending without prior approval and getting a license from Bank of Uganda. They were finding on two grounds. The first finding, which is a finding in respect of the lending. Can you engage in the business or in the financial business in Uganda without a proper license issued to you by Bank of Uganda? According to the Financial Institutions Act of 2004, you cannot. Two, there was an argument which was made in respect of that case. I presuppose you also suppose that people know the facts of the case, which I find odd, but you asked me to give the implications. So I will not delve into the background. But in brief, here we have Ham, who accessed a loan facility, and it is alleged in the argument which is made by DTB that for us, basically the loan application was made in Kenya, that money deposited on his account, and in Kenya, only DTB Uganda was supposed to just be a collection agent to forward that money to Ham. The finding of the court is to the contrary, because Justice Adonyo cites the letter of offer, which was made on 23rd October 2017, and indeed makes a finding that actually the letter of offer shows that there was an assumption of agency on the part of agency capacity on the part of DTB Uganda. Because he says, when you look at that letter of offer, DTB Kenya shows that DTB Uganda is our appointed agent and can debit your account in respect of all those matters stated under the letter. Now, can you act as an agent of a foreign bank without approval of the central bank? According to the Agent Banking Guidelines, regulations of 2017, in particular Regulation 5, which was the basis of the judgment made by the court in that very case of Ham Enterprises versus Ham and to others versus DTB Uganda and DTB Kenya. The finding is that you cannot, and indeed that is the proper position of the law in Uganda. So the court made the finding that you cannot act as an agent of a foreign bank which does not have authorization, first, to carry on business in Uganda when it's not properly licensed in Uganda, but two, you cannot assume agent's capacity without authorization of Bank of Uganda. So that was the ruling. But when I go back to your question, you ask a question that what is the implication. The ruling itself, it does not point to the implication. Indeed, it gives pointers as to what is happening. It's descriptive. It does not even generally analyze the general problem in Uganda, but it describes the problem that, you know what is happening, that banks, foreign bank, okay, one, clients who want access to credit, there are banks which cannot offer that kind of credit, according to the speculation which is also coming from the people who have tried to analyze the situation, that our banks or financial market in Uganda is not capable to finance particular projects. So instead of coming together, they forward it to their perhaps mother companies, banks, because most of these are subsidiaries, which is also the plight of our economy, that the entire finance market is largely outsourced. It's largely foreign. They go and acquire that money instead of going for joint arrangements where, for instance, DTB, if you cannot give this kind of credit to a consumer, you perhaps reach out to Barclays Bank, you reach out to others. Indeed, in this arrangement, there was that breach. So that judgment describes that position. But the second one, which is described and which is clear, which is the last statement made by the court, is that Bank of Uganda must implement this law to the latter. It must implement it as is. Because once you look at that ruling, you realize that even the person carrying out inspection of banks is not following some things. And I assume you will not discover that in the internal auditors' reports and other things. But what is, so when you ask me the general implication, I read it from the action of the Uganda Bankers Association. Yes. They have stampeded everyone, reaching an extent of, we were just sharing with Catherine, and she was telling me that they were saying that, you see, they were claiming that they had banned syndicate financing. Obviously, the judgment does not even talk about that. But when you look at their statement, they talk about the fact that they had not read the judgment. I saw one of a colleague, a lawyer friend of mine on Facebook, Peter Majela, works with Chapter 4. He had posted it somewhere and said that it's baffling for the Uganda Bankers Association to come out to respond to a judgment in which they also admit in that very statement that they had not read. They were saying that they had not read the ruling, that it had banned also syndicate financing, like she says. But so from that, you see, what is the implication? That perhaps almost all these banks are engaged in this kind of transactions. So the implication would be that this ruling is putting a stop to transactions of that nature, which can stifle their unforeseen incomes. It's something I see. But it has, when you look at this ruling, it also, and this is where I expect journalism to come in, to help us assess nature of loans of that, to assess loans of that nature. That can give a clear picture to most Ugandans to know which kind of banks are engaging in those kind of transactions. Yesterday, I attended just a brief engagement on that very question of the ruling. It was a meeting organized by some lawyers, and in one of those submissions made by a senior lawyer, I will not mention, he claimed there is a foreign bank which set up business in Uganda. For a very short time, it was targeting only one thing, one project of government. I don't know, because from the discussion it didn't seem like, it did seem from that discussion that, well, you have foreign entities that come for a purpose, do that and leave. And they are not ready to do it as legally provided.
But Suleiman, that might be legal as it stands. I want to bring in Christine here, the Bankers Association, and you were here on Thursday when the ruling came out. The Bankers Association spoke to NTV in an exclusive interview, and the ED said, look here, 5.7 trillion shillings of lending is held up in this syndicate lending, where local banks hold themselves up with the mother banks. And he seems to indicate that this ruling had held up capital. And indeed, the business desk reported that opening markets on Friday was really hard. tell us just what was the implication
I beg your pardon about that.
Yes, on Friday, it was really hard for them to get money to lend because many of the mother banks which had lent had expressed their dissatisfaction with government. Actually, in the night, government issued a statement, the Minister of Finance, saying that, look here, we are still committed to this syndicate lending, at least on the part of government projects.
But the ruling didn't even ban syndicate loan.
Yes, but their interpretation...
You are falling for their public
no, but no,
gimmick.
No, without a doubt. Whatever the ruling said, we're just saying that the outcome of the ruling, these are the effects that came out of it. How did the business desk report this story the day after the news story broke out?
Okay, yeah, so we've been doing we followed up the case for a long period of time while it's been going on. And one of the things that we actually mentioned as a business desk in the Daily Monitor was how peculiar it was that this case was really handled really fast. Because if you go to the commercial
Division
court,
of High Court.
yeah, commercial court, you will find there's a stack of cases there waiting for maybe hearing or something like that. And then you'll find many cases still really waiting. But then you'll find that the DTB case was really handled so fast, which sort of brought in some curiosity to us and we're like, how come this case was handled so fast? But anyway, even moving on from that, so you're asking about the 5.7 trillion. And yes, I agree with what he's saying, that it does point to a bit of laxity from BOU from my side. I think based on what the ruling was saying, it points to a bit of laxity from BOU, and hopefully from the 5.7 trillion that the UBA is saying, that case is not really replicated. Because if then it's also replicated, we could see massive, like UBA claims, could see massive default from different people. But anyway, still like you're saying, government came out and said what it said, so which is a good thing. I'm informed that one of the implications of the ruling was that when that happened, when UBA pushed out a statement that banned syndicated loaning, there was a loan that was supposed to come from South Africa. I think it was going to government, and it was held up just because of that. The implication was that groundbreaking for the industry that sort of held up a loan that was supposed to be coming through. I'm told that from the banking industry itself. So from us, as we're reporting it, so there's a case, there's a story that's coming out on Monday. I believe some of these guys will see it. Maybe I'll not go too deeply into it, but there's a story that's coming out on Monday. I'm sure some of the people have already seen it already. So Ham sent out a letter responding through his lawyers, of course, Mwema, sent out a letter responding to UBA claiming, you know what, we did not say. What you guys are saying is not true. The ruling never at any one point mentioned banning of syndicated loaning. Okay. Which, if you also look at the ruling, really, it didn't really specifically speak to that. It just spoke to, like he said, BOU's laxity. It spoke to the agents, the agent banking and whatnot. So what Ham came out to say in the statement, and maybe people will read it on Monday, it came out to say, you know what, we didn't speak to this. And there's a lot of issues that were mentioned in the letter from Mwema, talking about how the bankers are not really talking about the money. And they feel like, from the Mwema side anyway, they're talking about how they think the industry, the banking industry, is holding up a lot of money. They're doing a lot of things that are maybe not as ethical as they should be, or not doing the right, they're not following the right procedures. So there's really, that's really what's going to come out. And of course, we still look out for the appeal. And when I spoke to Bankers Association on Saturday, the ED Wilbert said he didn't want to comment on the matter. So he said the only thing they're going to push forward with now is the lawyers. So the lawyers are basically going to now start interacting, see what's good. See what's going on. And then, of course, we're waiting for BOU to see what BOU has to say about this, because it's not the first time BOU is put out on the spot over supervision. So it's really actually a bad thing for BOU to be put on the spot the second time over supervision. I feel they should clean up their act.
Yusuf, we've always had these stories about the economy, and the press has really regurgitated the things that the president has said, that the economy is healthy. And one of the quickest measures of the health of an economy is its banking sector, because it's where people get the capital that they use to operate. For a long time, the opposition has insisted, if you don't have local capital to work with, and you're working with multinational capital, then your economy is not healthy, because a lot of that money is being offloaded back to the mother countries that it's coming from. Do you think that the Ham and DTB case has actually tested the merit of our economy and found it wanting?
Absolutely, I think it has. But I want to start with a comment that she gave us, that the ED of Uganda Bankers Association was unwilling to talk. No. That's not true, because he wrote an opinion, a long opinion, in the New Vision, I think Thursday or Wednesday.
So just to interject, this was after. This basically happened on Saturday. So maybe the opinion came before. So what I was asking, when I spoke to him, I was asking him to comment on the HAM's response, saying they never banned syndicated loans.
Okay. But I found the comment really interesting. If you read it, it's wonderful prose. By the way, I should credit Wilfred for writing such beautiful prose. But it's laced with insults, right? He insults commenters like myself. He said things like, since 34%, that 62% of Ugandans are not banked. So that it's easy to say that we lack basic financial literacy. There are significant gaps in our financial literacy. And I found that really interesting. And then he carries on and on that most of the commenters are simply moralizing, that we've put together a crucible and moral fraternity that is really decampaigning banking in this country. And he said very interesting things, most of them insults, that the more commenters are maligning banks, the more the economy is going to be threatened by those who want to come and invest here and those who are willing to lend money to businesses. Okay, I think I'm going to be one of those commenters that Wilbrod directed his insults at. You know, I mean, I'm looking at this as a movie, right? As a movie where a gang of thieves, after successful haste, turn against each other. All right, and you ask the question: how is the business desk in Monitor or here or other newspapers covering this story? I think you're doing us a big disservice. This story is deeper than the legalese that Slamen Kakai is very eloquent at, right? I think we need to step out of the legalese and look at our economy in a broader sense. Authoritarian regimes often generate, manufacture their own rich men, right? And these rich men dominate the economy in very many ways. You have people fighting over markets. Now we have this case. I'm curious. I've been looking through the newspapers. What does Hamis Chigun produce, right? As a Marxist scholar, I think that the two things that produce wealth is land and labor, right? I'm looking for investments on land that Hamis Chigun is involved in to be as one of those big businessmen who are having these lots of monies given to them through these banks. What does it produce, right? You're either an industrialist, a farmer, a miner, a manufacturer. I don't see that. What is he doing? Has he got a long chain of real estate projects that is involved in? Because you used to write about him as involved in real estate and service sector. And I'm struggling to understand, what is he doing in the service sector? What is his real estate? What is his chain? Apart from this small project down here at Nachivubu, what else is he doing?
Surely it's not a small project.
It's a small project, no, in the true sense of
it's
rich
a whole
man.
stadium.
No, it's a small project. But besides that, but also as it is, he is not the rich person, because the constructor is the rich one. If you're looking at rich people, it's the one who owns the construction company, who takes the deal to actually build the building. That is a rich man. He's a dealer in the ordinary sense. He's the face of this facelift of the stadium, right? What does he do? I'm really struggling to understand. What does he do? In the service sector, as is often spoken about, or even the real estate sector, right? So I think media should help us, give us a profile of this rich Ugandan who is caught up in this really groundbreaking case in this country, right? I think that's the beginning. And the more we fail on that, but I said, I'm looking at this story as two thieves, a gang of thieves fighting each other after a successful haste, and I think they disagree on the loot or something goes wrong. You flip it on the side of DTB, right? Did they do their due diligence in giving this man money? Did they look back and see whether Hamis Chigundu and his non-existent franchise of businesses would actually pay back the money? Because he's not denying collecting the money, right? There's a small technicality that Kakai has really spoken to. It's a small technicality that the money was gotten from a bank outside of the company. He doesn't refute borrowing the money, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't do that, but he borrowed the money. You flip it on the side of the bank. What procedures did they follow? What they think called due diligence? How far did they go? What actually Kakai wrote a story here. He's been telling us in 2004, where many of these guys were getting loans.
Actually, I have the story. Can I give you information?
Getting these loans without
we'll get to that after the break. But I wanted to ask,
as somebody interested in the political economy of this country, I see two thieves. There's a thief who got a loan, and the thief who was willing to give it. Right. So now the haste has gone wrong. and they are playing it out in the public domain through the legal.
Yusuf, before I let you go, just a brief. And even if you don't look at it as if you look at it as actual business, trading in business, there's a maxim that you come to equity with clean hands. A man has given you their money, and you've accepted that money, you've taken it. When you fail to pay back is when you realize the hand that you used to give me this money is actually not the right hand. I wanted the money from the left hand, but you've given it from the right hand. But this is after failing to pay back.
That's true.
So is there some equity, like are there clean hands in which you approach this case?
I'm going to return to the analogy, the stuff we see in the movies. Really big deal here. It's a big deal here. We need to see through the move. Because, you know, you gave the money knowing, because banks look ahead and see, knowing he might not pay. But you gave it. Kakeri's story, there was no business to pay for, right? They gave it. And then you can see this sort of, like a blatant blackmail from UBA, because it's a cartel. And you know, when the cartel comes down, we're doing an analysis of the failures in our economy in this country. Banks are really highly responsible, right? But let's speak to the cartel, because we're in a capitalist dispensation, right? In a capitalist dispensation, the market is left to operate, right? So if you have disagreement, you go to the courts of judicature. Right, so a bank has the grievances with its client. They went to the courts of judicature. Now the UBA is ganging up and inviting the government. That's absolute blackmail. And as they said, they put a halt to all the transactions happening where the government is involved. Government did guarantee Hamis Chagondo, did they? They did. So it's absolute blackmail by making a small connection that, you know, in such a judgment, banks which are lending money to government feel threatened. It's absolute blackmail. Deal with it. They know the procedures, right? If you are aggrieved in a judgment, you appeal it. As simple as that. You can't blackmail government. But I can tell you, I go back, it's a cartel.
Will apply to become amicus curiae in the matter.
It's a cartel.
And
Wilbur, I'm sorry to say this, banks are a cartel. They are in this, because you didn't do due diligence. There was no business, because they get this small project down here in 2017. They didn't have it, basically. But I can show you who is the actual loser. That's why, like, capitalism is such a very dangerous thing. They got this money without business, and then the vendors who operated in that small space had to lose their market because of this. They had to have something to show that they're doing business, right? There's another small project opposite Macquarie University, which Isaiah Lukwagas told us was built in a road reserve. Right? Yes, so that's a small project.
It's already
that's not ground enough to give these billions of monies to such a small business person. You see, so and now they returned to Bank of Uganda, to the government, Minister of Finance, Bank of Uganda, because now the public has to pay. I can guarantee you the public is going to cough money, because you see the sort of blackmail this banks are into right now, the public is being invited to pay. So the taxpayer will have to come in and say, okay, maybe as Museveni has often done it, you know, we pay you on behalf of, you know, the banking environment in this country. I think it's really dangerous.
Actually, Raymond, that's the detail I wanted to give when I said I did a story around 2016. For viewers out there and the panel here, it was titled "What Bailout Seekers Have in Common" by The Observer, published on 3rd August 2016. In it, I show that most of the entities that had defaulted on loans, they had one thing in common, that almost most of them went and filed documents with the register of companies showing that they were borrowing money after the fact. And yet ideally under the Companies Act, it's regular that you do it before. One of the businesses was Ham Enterprises. In that story, for purposes of accuracy, let me read it clearly here. I'd indicated that according to the resolution filed by Ham Enterprises Uganda Limited, the company acknowledges borrowing 5 billion from Diamond Trust Bank Limited, although the register of companies was notified on March 31st, 2016 of this resolution. The resolution does not specifically indicate the exact date when it was approved. Instead of filing the resolution before, borrowing as the norm is, Ham Enterprises borrowed and filed the resolution later. And I indicate in that very story, NRA money. Coincidentally, around the time in 2015 when the side companies borrowed money, NRM also conducted a fundraiser for its activity and collected at least shilling 16 billion from prominent businessman. Around June 2015, Hams Chigundu, one of the listed directors of Ham Enterprises, donated shillings 200 million to the fundraising. So what is the
direct correlation with that?
Exactly.
Yes, there's a direct correlation.
And let me tell you, when you look, one of the things which journalism can help us do very fantastically well is to go back and address the entire transaction. The people involved, because here you're looking at not just only lawyers who advised on the transaction, but I'm also looking at internal auditors who come back and say, disclose to DTB that your financial reporting is like this, and yet the financial reporting has transactions that are questionable at law. And even Bank of Uganda, which comes and approves their records of financial standing, who is responsible? That is what Yusuf is explaining, that if we don't go and point shame all those people, we are not explaining the whole the circus that holds this economy together. How these institutions are used as conduits to get money, which facilitates the consolidation of this regime. It's a very important point. And let me tell you, it takes you back to what happened in the credit crunch of 2008. The credit crunch of 2008. It was the laxity of the people who were in charge of the mortgages, giving them bad ratings, wrong ratings, founded on wrong principles, and they were declaring them as valid mortgages, on which representation insurance firms were insuring these loans, but in reality, a bank had failed to do its due diligence. You ask yourself, this ruling is about a loan between Ama Enterprises and DTB, Uganda. But out of all of a sudden, they are mentioning 5.7 trillion held up in syndicate financing. The ruling doesn't even make mention of it. They are running to a conclusion of mobilizing social psyche towards supporting a particular view, which is ideally not what is emphasized under the laws of Uganda.
But Kakaide, very, very briefly, and this is something that the bankers have said very oftenly, they don't have money to give to Ugandans, particularly for large projects, like the kind that Ham Enterprises wants to do. No bank has that money in their coffers at the moment to do it. So for them to be able to carry it out, they go and appeal to their mother
according
banks.
To the facts, Ahmad asked for how much money? Raymond had Ahmad asked for how much money?
Ahmad asked for about $1.4 million.
$1.4 million. Barclays Bank, what they call syndicate financing, is that more than one financial institution come together to provide the funding. If a loan request had made to be DTB, out of humility, they should have walked to Barclays Bank, Stanbic Bank, Centenary Bank to provide this loan facility. And what is the benefit of the taxpayer? That this transaction is taxed according to the Income Tax Act of Uganda. That money doesn't harm benefits, the taxpayer benefits, and the economy grows. DTB is requested for this financing, goes to DTB Kenya, which transaction is not in the purview of the Income Tax Act. This is pure illicit financing. There is no way you can explain it and justify it. I'm telling you,
you can't call on them.
Raymond, could I just say something?
Okay.
So, of course, as a business, you also have to understand that when the banks do that, and I've seen people talking about it, why don't you lend, why don't you borrow from maybe your Stanbic, why don't you borrow from Barclays? Your KCB, why don't you borrow from, let's say, DTB? You see, when banks do that, there's a cost that comes with it. They're going to have to incur a commission that they'd have to share. As a business, you'd prefer to share with maybe your mother company than, let's say, if you had to go and share with another business that has no link to you. But of course, as you're saying, yes, the economy benefits that way. But this is a private business that does not, of course, they do say they have sentiment, they care about the economy, they care about the taxes, but it's a business, and they really care about their shareholders.
And this very bank does not declare it like it borrowed money from DTB Kenya.
My producer says you need to take a break. Let's take a very short break, but when we come back, we get into the discussion on regulation of this financing, but also the discussion of how did journalism miss one of the biggest business stories of its time.
Exactly, that's what I will talk about.
Thank you so much for staying with the Fourth Estate. The actual Fourth Estate happens in the break. I wish that we could relay this to you, but we cannot. But now that we're here, let's discuss the regulation of banks. Yusuf, I want to start with you. This is the second time in 2 years that we're getting back the conversation on how are banks regulated, how they give out loans. And for the first time, journalism was criticized for going soft on the Bank of Uganda and going soft on Crane Bank. And after Crane Bank tumbled and Bank of Uganda went through the COSASE committee, I think the inkling was clear that, you know what, something must be done about these banks, particularly to explain their workings to the public so that the public can understand. And it looks like journalism fell back and waited. And now here we have, yet again, one of the bigger stories that discussing supervision of Bank of Uganda, supervision of money coming into Uganda. Taxpayers very likely going to lose money in a deal that went bad between two big businesses. Yes, and yet again, people are asking the questions, how did this happen? Actually, the public is still asking, how did this happen?
24 billion at stake and $25 million.
Yes.
I cannot call them two big businesses. I think two big thieves.
Businesses. But yes, please, whatever you choose.
It's a polite way of putting it, but two big thieves are going to cost the taxpayer a lot of money. First of all, I need to say very emphatically that we're not dealing with an economic financing question, neither are we dealing with a legal question.
Yeah.
Right? The legality is the space in which politics reproduces itself. We're dealing with the clearly political question here. We're dealing with the ways in which this country has been run, right? When you look at Bank of Uganda itself is sort of a cartel, right? The closure of indigenous banks, for example, Uganda Commercial Bank, TFA, Greenland Bank, these banks were working very profoundly in developing the economy, right? They understood the context, the local context, the space in which the ordinary business person reproduced themselves, the ways in which they conduct business. These banks appreciated the ways in which these ordinary folks seek for loans, the type of collateral they bring to the table, and interest was negotiated in a different space. So Bank of Uganda, failure to decolonize, first of all, killed all these banks and created space for largely foreign-owned banks, right? And Kakero was speaking to it. The banking sector is dominated by these banks. All these Ugandans are laborers in these banks. Wilfred, all of them are laborers. They don't have a stake in, and these banks don't have a stake in this economy, a powerful stake. They can close shop and go, all right, as long as they find the conducive, the conditions unfavorable, right? And it is up to them to decide when they're unfavorable and they're not. So when you look at the ways in which these banks are regulated, foreign banks mostly vis-a-vis local banks, there's a huge problem, right? But listen, this is not, it's not a mistake. This is by design.
Deliberate.
Right? It's deliberate. The economy must be dominated by banks over which have control, right? They can't finance opposition. They can't develop the ordinary person. Because the truism that it's the poor that can be governed is actually true, right? This is why businesses are closing downtown. We've let a long stream of Chinese get loans with very small interests. I picked a story that in Barclays, back in the days, there was a deal for Chinese businessmen and Indians to pick loans at different interest rates, right? And the local business person cannot compete with the Chinese or the Indian, right? This is why you find in many of these places, their fares are fairly cheaper, right? Their charges are fairly cheaper on all these commodities. So, so this is the ways in which this country has been run, right? And all the so many associations we have, and I know we're going to be talking about the mobile money haste, with all the institutions against money laundering and fraud. How do people apply for loans without business, right? How do you let that happen? And then all of a sudden they're asking for bail.
But it should be logical that, growth of the economy should be something that appeals to government. Why then does government have international banks which stifle the local economy? No,
I think you start from a wrong premise that growing the economy appeals to the government, right?
It should be logical. That's the premise within which I'm working with.
The finance market.
You seek a government, you seek to govern a people so that you can advance
unless you don't live here. If you live here, you appreciate that the thing of convenience the local person doesn't. As a ghostwriter, I've spoken to local business people here, who are taxed for manufacturing things locally, and then the Indian investor, the Chinese investor can bring them free as agricultural input, and they're not taxed, right? And you see, recently there was a story in Monitor over a single person who got a tax holiday to bring in rice at the expense of local farmers, right? So if you live here, You know that this government
indigenous capital
works on the premise that the poor are governable. The poor are easily governable. I mean, the people of Kasita are always crying over these loans. Shops in this town are paying rent in dollars on arcades which don't even have toilets, right? They're paying rent in dollars and it's increased every single day, right? So if you're speaking to say that this government cares, you wouldn't have collapsed Uganda Commercial Bank, for example. You wouldn't have collapsed Stayfield Greenland if you really cared about the growth of indigenous capital, right? But it doesn't. So, I mean, these stories are so many, you can go on and on.
I want to bring in Christine here. You sit on the business desk of fairly the most independent newspaper we can find at the moment, which should be...
Is that the Observer?
No, this is the Daily Monitor.
Yeah.
So
The long track record of 25 years. Also, I am biased by the fact that it's a Nation Media Group product.
Exactly.
But how did the business desk miss the fact that this was going to become such a huge story again to put Bank of Uganda at the spot?
Yeah, so I think we actually have to apologize for missing that, because really I think we looked at it mostly from a single, let's say the usual bank, let's say lender cases, because we've had many of those coming up. And I think one of the other cases that now is probably raising a bit of storm is now the Equity Bank, Simba Manuel House. But then again, like I said, really have to apologize for this, because we never looked into the tenants that were really involved here. We never saw the implications that would come from a ruling such as this one. And really, I don't know, I don't think, aside from the fact that it was UBA is making it seem like it's banning a syndicated loan, I think, yes, there is a component of it being a big deal, but we also have to look at it from the fact that we still don't know from the 5.7 trillion whether the 5.7 trillion shillings in loans had due diligence from the commercial banks themselves and BOU itself. So we still have to figure that out. But yes, there was a bit of maybe oversight from us, but hopefully we're going to take it up. Like you were saying, there's a lot more to be done from this story alone, because we need to get different things from different stakeholders. We need to find out what exactly, like you said, what harm is actually doing, because for him to manage to get all this money without let's say actual presence, tangible
worthiness.
Yeah, that you can actually see.
But
for
he's taken
yourself.
almost 7 portfolios in the bank of land that could
Yeah,
have,
he did
but
actually.
spread
But
like-
don't have the mortgage.
But you hear the change of strategy.
Inflated.
During the break, Cathay was reading a story in the Monitor, which was published in the Monitor, where he had indicated that they were debiting his account for a loan which was partly received. Then here we see a change of legal strategy in the courtroom, that instead of saying that what you're debiting is not what is due to you, we change strategy and we basically talk about the illegality of the entire transaction, and which is done by a smart lawyer who has a good knowledge of what banks do in the country.
I want to ask you the last question. This looks to me like South Africa altogether, 2006, state capture, very likely state capture. Why isn't a journalist walking to the publisher's house and lodging a manuscript on state capture? Big businesses have shown for the last 3 years they are capable of boxing government into making very, very rare submissions.
I explained it previously. State capture of media. One thing,
not just media, business and government.
Business
media,
and government.
media is just tagging along.
Well, media is usually seen as the communication platform which propounds the ideas of those who are subjugated, especially the protest media I keep talking about. But why is there no conversation around it of this state capture, which we are seeing right now? It is that the connivance starts from the economy, obviously. It started from the economy, which did happen yesterday, and it's not captured by this government. It's purely, this is, which I will call multinational capital, representing itself in different forms. It starts from monopoly capitalism to what you're seeing as globalization, the movement of international finance, which you're also calling development finance and everything. Then it is covered under the state system, which is born out of, evolves from that very system. Now, media, which is supposed to check it, is also under capture. And here I'm talking about DTB, owned by a very big business player, you know, who also is the biggest media owner, but in reality, is the biggest media owner of the biggest media enterprise. So you have to understand that it's it's a patterned thing. But the reason why I would also like to point out, because I don't think necessarily it is true that the reason why media is not covering that is purely explained by that. There is also incompetence I see in the media houses. Like, for instance, what has happened in the court? Go back and extract the entire court record.
But Kakari, you said
mention the letter.
Wait, you said you're still a
talk
journalist.
About.
So who are you?
No, right, I'm still a journalist, but here now I'm critiquing
who are you bashing?
myself.
You should be doing it yourself, essentially.
Ideally, we are supposed to go back to that courtroom, pick all the documents, talk to all the players, because Yusuf has given a very important statement that this is a play. It is already arranged. How it's going to be played out in the media, and even they are structuring the conversation. I saw it yesterday in the discussion that I was invited to by a colleague, because I don't set out to participate in some engagements. When I see the key players, it's structured, the conversation. What are you supposed to talk about and what are you not supposed to talk about? I think the media, we need to pick this transaction, go back and reflect on these people who are stampeding State House, stampeding media platform, social media, who are insulting people. Look and detail what is Absa's trading in the last financial year. What business are they doing, which is similar to this? If they are not doing any, this one, DFCU, DTB, all these banks, and you show the public where we stand today.
All right. Thank you so much.
Importantly,
Kakari, can you hold a little bit? I have a short response to your question. It's not state capture, right? That businessmen have captured the state. It's not. It's a conspiracy. It's a cartel of sorts. In very Marxist terms, capitalism cannot reproduce itself without the violence of the state. They have to work together, right? So it's not conspiracy. It's not capture. It's the ways in which our modern political economic dispensations operate. The example is the taking over of Wino Market, right? The minister for Kampala, who is the state, unleashed violence onto the market so that they can facilitate the capitalist, Hamis Chigundu, who came with big money, right? So the state works very closely. Maybe they're one and the same, you know, in dominating. Let me finish this point. In dominating, in exploiting, reproducing themselves. So what you're saying now is, you know, we're going to go back to the market, right? We're going to go back to many of these investments that the ordinary folks were part of these investments, and they lost them. You go to the markets, many of them around this town have been rebuilt. You're going to go to business. I've been researching, for example, land across this country, and you see big capital moves in with the violence of the state. The state uses its LDUs and military to chase people off the land so they can establish the business person, right? So when banks return to the state to harass it, to rein in on the court ruling, they know what they're doing. Yeah. They know you've been stealing with us. How come?
But Yusuf,
how come you're not giving up?
Very finally, please. Very finally.
Use the Marxist framework. And from a Marxist perspective, I don't think we even believe that the state works closely with capital, but it's a product of capital itself. It's manufactured by the capital. It is there for the purposes of the capital.
Yeah, capital just helps with the state helps with the regulation of the labor.
Because when you look at that regulation, which says that a foreign bank is not supposed to carry on some business without prior approval by Bank of Uganda. Bank of Uganda represents whose interests? It's ideally meant to represent the national interest. At the vetting stage, it's one looking at whether this entity, a foreign bank which wants to carry on some business in Uganda, except deposit taking, it is properly constituted in law. But two, to also protect the local market, that this product is coming to offer, is it a product that cannot be offered by our market? That's why when it comes to approval, it can even say, we are not approving this. So even but the Bank of Uganda, which we are talking about, it's also biased. It's a Bank of Uganda which is a product of neoliberal capital. It's a product which is not there to protect indigenous capital. Most of the people who are involved in all these things, like what Yusuf has mentioned, they are the very individuals who cannot even walk the who cannot use their powers, authority as envisaged by law to say we are protecting our nascent banking industry, which is indigenous and is there for indigenous capital. They will just continue to close them where they are not able. They will continue to say, I mean, like for instance, syndicate financing. We have very big projects that have to be financed. And the argument they are raising that our banks cannot be able to mobilize these resources. But how many of them are pushing and advocating for the capitalization of UDB, All Post Bank for commercial loans, UDB in respect of development financing? Yes, how many of them? It's not.
Thank you so much, Kakaire. Our time is really fast spent, and my producer really says that we must sign out at this point. But thank you so much for joining us for the Fourth Estate. This conversation is going to be uploaded to YouTube, so you can find it on YouTube. But also, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We will be back with the Fourth Estate next Sunday.